This journey begins with a walk. It's a walk that I've made every year for the first probably 12 years of my life. Growing up from the little boy, 2, 3 years old, I remember holding my mom's hand each and every year we'd go. And we'd make the walk. There'd be stones to the right and to the left. And we'd get to the one at the end of the line. And each and every year I would read the same thing. Loving husband, beloved father. December 24th, 1964. March 28th, 1991. And growing up, I wasn't sure how to interpret that. How would I want to be remembered? And it was a question that I would face 23 years later. You see, growing up, my mom was the youngest of 12. I was one of 41 cousins, and family was something that was super important to me. Each and every year for Christmas, we'd have over 120 people at my grandparents' house. So that unconditional love and support of one another was something that I totally took for granted and thought that everybody had that. I was an Eagle Scout. I was a 4-sport athlete. I checked all the boxes growing up. But soon I would face a decision and the adversity that no one would ever wish on anybody. You see, 22 years old, everything started to change. First, it was a breakup, something we all experience. But for me, I took it personal. It was one of those things where I felt like I wasn't good enough for someone. And it was the first time in my life that I experienced that. Because I grew up, again, trying to please everybody in my life. From my mother to my family and my friends, checking all the boxes, all the accomplishments, everything that was expected of me. It was all a box that needed to be checked. But it wasn't my box. So at 22, double majoring, 3.8 student, I was doing all of the things. I was on track. I was seen as this person that everybody wanted to be. But inside, I felt empty. In my last semester of college, I had this experience where I went out and I student taught, but it wasn't what I imagined it to be. Days after my 22nd birthday, I heard the C word for the first time. Cancer. At this point in my life, it was a wake-up call, but I didn't wake up. I had the surgery that left me with a 7-inch scar, but I wanted nothing to do with being a 22-year-old with cancer. So I put my head down and I kept working harder towards that goal that I didn't even want to accomplish. 6 months later, I would be involved in a car accident where I would watch a high school classmate and friend of mine take her last breaths right before my eyes in my arms. And it caused me to question everything. At a time where I didn't even want to be here on this earth, questioning my purpose, my direction, my vision, questioning whether I even wanted to be here. And then she was taken in a car accident. She brought more joy, light, and energy into this world than anybody I could have ever imagined. I went to this deep and dark place where I would escape with anything I could. Sometimes it was alcohol. Sometimes it was drugs. Sometimes it was food. Anything I could use to escape my reality so that I could pretend that everything was normal. You see, we live in a society where this perception of perfection is the norm. What we post on our Facebook and Instagram defines who we are and what we are and the success of our life. But we don't take those things with us to the grave. And so each and every year when I would make that walk with my mother to go visit my dad, I would see how he was remembered. And he was remembered as my father. So my perspective started to change. 4 months after the accident, I left school. 23 years after my father made a decision that would forever impact my life to take his own, I would be considering that same decision. Fortunately for me, I've always surrounded myself with great people and great friends. And when they reached out to my mother on that evening, worried that I was going to hurt myself or perhaps take my own life, she didn't take that very lightly. And so I woke up the next morning to her shaking me awake, saying, Dylan, wake up. Are you okay? I said, yeah, Mom. What's up? Not even realizing that I had made these comments the night before to my friends, expressing my hopelessness, lack of purpose, and direction in life. The next question she asked me was, Dylan, why aren't you in class? And it was at that point where I had to start owning up to the fact that I hadn't been even living up to the expectations put on me. I had totally given up and had been sleeping upwards of 16 hours a day. Because again, I was trying to escape, and I would rather be asleep than face the reality that was my life. As if things couldn't get any worse at that point, 6 months later, I was at an Iowa football game. As I had done so many Saturdays, I went out with my friends the night before. I woke up early on Saturday morning, because at this point in my life, my mantra was, I can't party all day unless I start in the morning. And so I woke up that morning, except this one was a little bit different. You see, overnight, in those 6 hours that I had slept, I developed this golf ball-sized lump, just an inch away from the scar that I had gotten 18 months prior. I knew it was back. But for the day, I put that mask on that I had so many times, pretending as if nothing was wrong and that everything was okay. I made it through the day. We went up to Mayo Clinic the following weekend, and it was at that point that they realized that this was more serious than we had initially thought. Scan after scan, prod after prod, biopsy after biopsy, the results came back. The doctor looked down at his clipboard. He looked back up at me, and I could see the fear in his eyes. He didn't want to deliver the news. He looks back down. He goes, Dylan, you have tumors in your liver, lung, neck, and 3 tumors in your spine. I look at him and I say, okay, doc, what are my chances? It was at that point where he told me I had less than 15% chance of surviving at 23 years old. But growing up in Dyersville, Iowa, home of the Field of Dreams, I was a huge baseball fan. I played, I coached, I umpired. And this was in 2014, and I was a Cubs fan. And we were the lovable losers, going on 106 years without a World Series victory. And so I still felt like my odds of beating cancer were better than the Cubs' chances of winning a World Series anytime soon. But it was the fight that I needed. Cancer gave me something to fight for when I felt like life wasn't worth fighting for. And there were a few turning points that completely changed my perspective. You see, as part of this study, I got put into a trial study where they combined 2 drugs with about a 5% success rate, and they were hoping to get something between 10 and 15%. As part of that, I spent 4 weeks in the ICU where I did treatments every 8 hours, so 3 times a day, for as many treatments as I could take over the course of 4 weeks. And there were 3 events that happened to me that week that started to shift my perspective. The first was, one evening, I woke up with 8 doctors surrounding me, one holding paddles, watching the screen, waiting for me to flatline so that they could jump me back to life. My blood pressure could drop on a dime, my organs were starting to shut down, but it was our only hope. Just a few days later, again, I was in the ICU and we were all there for different reasons, and a lady across the hall from me took her last breaths. And I got to share that experience with her. I could hear everything that was going on from my room. I was connected in all the same places, monitored by all the same machines. And I could hear her family and her friends as she took her last breaths. Everything from crying to laughing, the joy, the sadness, and everything in between. All the memories of her life. And I got to thinking, what would my family, what would my friends, but most of all, what would my 3 younger brothers say about me if I were to pass on? Just a few days later, they came to visit me, and it hit me. I wasn't sure what my why was. You know, so often in motivational books, what's your why? What's your why? Why do you do what you do? I didn't know my why. Just a few months ago, I didn't even want to live, and now I'm fighting for my life. But all of a sudden, I knew who my who was. Who's your who? When things get tough, why do you continue to do what you do? Who do you continue to do what you do for? And so I had my who. So each and every week, I would go to battle. I'd get my butt kicked. I lost 35 pounds over the course of a month and a half. I couldn't keep anything down. And there were so many times where I thought I was at the end. Things got real, and they got real really fast. But it didn't stop there. After my treatments wrapped up, we thought we were out of the woods. We thought we had it beat. The initial results came back. You're cancer-free. I said, yes, I'm going to pursue my dream and I'm going to move out to Colorado. And just a few days later, they said, hold up a minute. The advanced report came back. You still have the 2 small tumors in your liver. And I was devastated. But I wanted to move. I wanted to pursue my dream of living out in Colorado and climbing mountains on the weekends. And so I made the decision to do it. But after 2 months of living out there, the report came back that the tumors in my liver were starting to grow again. And so I moved back home. I moved back to that support, back to the cousins, back to the family, back to the friends, back to the doctors that I knew, liked, and trusted. Over the next year and a half, I would continue to do treatments every 3 weeks. And then on January 19th, 2017, I heard the best news that I could ever hear. No evidence of disease. We're taking you off the treatments. And then I took a look in the mirror, and I took a look down at the scale when I weighed in that day to do my last treatment. And I had 13 inches of hair, and I was 260 pounds. And I looked more like Chris Farley as a motivational speaker than any speaker that I had ever seen before. You see, one of the mentors in my life came and visited me at the hospital, and he planted the seed. He had been featured in a movie, and he'd been speaking all over the country after he wrote a book. And he said, Dylan, one day you're going to share this story with millions of people, and they're going to find inspiration in your story. But again, I took a look in the mirror and I said, man, if people ever saw me on stage, they'd say, there's no way this guy's going to motivate me. So I went to work. Over and over and over again across the course of my journey, I've been playing the victim card. I've been running from my circumstances, trying to hide from reality, blaming everything I could except myself. But it was time to make a change. You see, over the course of all of those events, it occurred to me that in a world that is filled with cancer, in my world that was filled with cancer, I could choose to be a cure. And now that sounds great and grandiose, but it happens in the smallest of moments. Another one of my mentors used to say, small hinges swing big doors. And so if I wanted to see massive change in my life, it had to start with small changes on a consistent basis. So that's what I did. I started to go to work. I started to find myself in the gym more instead of the bars. Cut out that 3 a.m. pizza that became the norm for me over the years. And soon I started to see success. You see, we find power in progress. In that ICU, each and every week, I could see progress. Every scan, I could see progress. But it came after the work. And so I started to realize that there were parallels in all of these areas of my life where I was starting to see some change in a positive direction. And so I knew if I stayed consistent, just like I stayed consistent each and every week with my treatments, I would start to see change in my own life. And so I started to ask myself, what would it mean for me to be a cure? And I started to evaluate my life. And for me, it starts with culture. Culture, unconditional love, resilience, and a willingness to evolve in a world that's constantly changing. No one knew culture better than I did growing up. Again, I was one of 41 grandkids. My mom was the youngest of 12. People are like, you guys are crazy. 120 people at your Christmas? I don't even know 120 people. Yet it was their love and support at a time when I needed it most that made all the difference. But culture is more than that. Culture is your beliefs, your standards, and your expectations for not only your life, but the people around you. And so I started to see that my decisions were affecting other people's life as well. In a world that was telling me that I was a victim of my circumstances, I could change my circumstances with my own actions and decisions on a daily basis. Again, I was a huge baseball fan. I played under one of the legendary high school baseball coaches in the state of Iowa, Tom Jank Jr. He won almost 1,100 baseball games, and I was part of almost 300 of them as a player and a coach. 4 of those years while I was coaching on his staff, I had cancer. And he taught our teams each and every year that if you believed, and if your goal was to win the last game that you ever played, you'd forever be remembered a champion. So that was the goal every single year. It didn't matter what players we had on the team that year, who we had lost, what all-staters we had lost off the team, how young we were. It was never a rebuild. It was always a reload, and we would find a way. The first 3 years I was on his staff, we went to the state championship, and it showed. Through the standards that we set every day at practice, the belief in his guys, and how we carried ourselves on the practice field and between the lines. One of my favorite coaches is Dabo Swinney, the head football coach at Clemson. Most people didn't know who he was 10 years ago, but now that he's going toe-to-toe with Alabama each and every year, competing for national championships, they want to know what's different about Dabo. When asked about it, he said this: when I got there, my guys only kind of wanted it. They wanted to win, but they didn't think they could win. The belief wasn't there. And it reflected my own life. You see, when I was 19 years old, one of my high school friends was 20. And after 3 days of missing class, his roommates told him, you either need to go to class or go to the hospital. These stomach cramps, you got to get something checked out. And so he went to the hospital, and he found himself dead 17 days later from melanoma. The same cancer that I was battling. And my mom went and visited his mom after she found out that it had come back stage 4. And it was like she was defeated. It was like she had written me off, that I was going to end up like he did. And so I was frank with her. I said, Mom, we're going to do this one of two ways. Again, she was my biggest cheerleader. I was all she had left of my dad. And we'd become best friends growing up. At 2 years old, I walked her down the aisle, holding her hand just the same way as I did each and every time we went to visit Dad growing up. I said, Mom, you have to believe. You have to believe I have a chance. Because if you don't believe I have a chance, I don't. But believing is the only chance that we have. And that's what culture is all about. The standard has to be set. You have to believe in the cause. And you have to execute. Unconditional love. So after that tough conversation that we had, again, I spent 4 weeks in the ICU, and I got to see what unconditional looked like each and every day. Unconditional love. She slept in a windowsill that was shorter than she was, and she's not very tall. And she never complained once. And I got to see, but most importantly, I got to feel what unconditional love felt like. You know, I've been a part of a lot of great teams that loved each other as players, coaches, and it was like family. But it became real those 4 weeks in the ICU. She had no escape. There was no office. There was no living room. None of that. She was with me all 4 weeks out of her choice, her love, her compassion, and she never complained once. And so in my mind, I got to thinking, this woman that I was trying to please my whole life, whatever it took, even if it meant hiding and suppressing how I was actually feeling, if she could love me in this place, where I had lost all function of everything, even the simplest functions that we take for granted each and every day, she could love me through anything. And so now it was like playing with house money. I could do anything I wanted and she would love me through it. And all of a sudden, these expectations that I had set on my own life, that I had thought she wanted for me, at the end of the day, she just wanted me to be happy. She just wanted me to be successful and carry on my father's legacy. Resilience. Sometimes things don't go as planned. We can plan and plan and plan and hope that things go just as we had planned. But sometimes that proverbial curveball comes and you're not expecting it. That's where that who is your who comes from. When stuff starts to get tough, who do you lean on? Who do you go to? Who do you rely for help? So each and every day, when we're doing the things that we do, where do we go for help? Do we continue to gossip in the break room, talking about our other coworkers, trying to break each other down so that we can get a leg up, climbing up the corporate ladder on the backs of the people that we work with each and every day? Or are we going to cut that off right now and start to rebuild the culture and say, you know what, today I'm going to be a cure. In this small moment, I'm going to be a cure. I'm going to be resilient. I'm going to say it stops here. We're a team. Again, I go back to the game of baseball. The second state championship we won as a coach. We were down. We were getting dominated all game long, facing one of the top pitchers in the game. But our mantra, again, was Blazers believe. And it was all the way down to the last out, the last inning. We had nobody left on our bench, but we needed a good at-bat. And we went to a guy on our bench who had put the work in for 4 years and never got to start. Never got to start. But he stuck it out and he continued to put the work in. And because coach knew that we would need him, and he always treated the last guy on the bench like his returning All-Staters, he knew who to call on in that moment when we needed it most. And that kid battled. He got down 2 strikes, fouled pitches off, and ended up working the walk that would force in the tying run of the state championship game to get it to our leadoff hitter, who ended up walking off with a game-winning walk as well. And it showed me what resilience looks like. It doesn't happen by accident. It's something that we can practice each and every day. Again, it's in those small moments that seem meaningless, but on the teams that perform in the highest level, it's happening each and every day. When things get tough in practice, when things get tough at work, when deadlines get shortened, and it's time to pony up and either make it happen or go down fighting, what do you choose to do? Do you choose to fold? Or do you dig deep and rely on what you've worked on all your life, or who you've worked your whole life for, and get after it? And then the last thing it is to be a cure is a willingness to evolve in a world that's constantly changing. Through all of this adversity that I faced, it became very apparent that if I wanted different results, I had to change the actions that I put in each and every day. So often we hear the words, you just got to try harder. You just got to try harder. You just got to try harder. Yet we don't take the time to step back and reevaluate. Again, I always go back to sports. And as a football player, we would always watch film. And I was like, why are we always watching film? Same plays every week. Why do we watch film? So we could pick up on the patterns of what we were doing well, what we were doing wrong, and where we could improve. But if we don't take the time to watch film on our own lives, how will we ever get better? See, I was fortunate enough to be on both ends of the cancer spectrum. The first treatment that I did was an experimental trial drug. That bought us enough time to get us to where there was an FDA-approved option available. It was through that process of the experimental trial drug that led them to the treatment that ended up saving my life. But if they would have continued to do things how they had always done, I wouldn't be here today. Before I was diagnosed with melanoma, the only option was surgery. If they couldn't treat it with surgery and they couldn't get it with chemo and radiation, you were done. But through trial and error, watching the film, a willingness to evolve in a world that's constantly changing, all of a sudden they found the answer. Where does that fit in your life? The worst thing that we can hear at work, at home, on the field, is this is how we've always done it. This is how we've always done it. Maybe you've had success, but how you've always done it is not going to take you to the next level. It starts with a willingness to change, a willingness to be humble, a willingness to give yourself an honest assessment of where you're at today. So often I think of facing adversity like using a GPS. And growing up, middle-class family in Northeast Iowa, we would always go on vacation. And if we couldn't drive there, we didn't go there. That was the bottom line. But on this particular vacation, the GPS had just come out. Kind of you plug into your cigarette lighter and stick on the front window of your car. Before the cell phones caught up to this, and you had 4G service everywhere you went. On this particular trip, we went to Florida. And we got caught in a roundabout. And the GPS just couldn't keep up. And it just said, recalculating, recalculating, recalculating. And I feel like so often in life, even when there is a willingness to evolve and change, sometimes we just get caught up in the rat race where we're so busy recalculating that we forget to make a choice. Sometimes all it takes is to make a choice, and then we get that instant feedback to say, did this get me closer, or am I further away? And now I need to make another adjustment. It reminds me of a question that was posed to me by a gentleman that I had on the podcast. And he was asked this growing up after he had been burned on 100% of his body and survived. But a gentleman by the name of Jack Buck, the legendary baseball announcer from St. Louis, heard about this story. And he went and visited this 9-year-old boy who was fighting for his life, much like I was at 23. You see, Jack walked out of the hospital room that day, and he asked the nurse, what are his chances? She wouldn't even answer him. But he went home that night, and he cried, and he asked himself one question. What more can I do? Not what more can society do? Not what more can my company do for me? Not what can the government do for me? What more can I do? And he came up with the answer. Again, this boy, 9 years old, needs to get back to school once he gets out of the hospital, but he can't write because his fingers are mangled from the fire blast. And through this question, what more can I do? He came up with the answer as the St. Louis Cardinals baseball announcer to send this 9-year-old boy autographed baseballs by the St. Louis Cardinals. But it wasn't about the baseball. It wasn't about the autograph. It was about the letter that came with it that said, if you write a thank you to the man who wrote you this one, I'll send you another baseball. Again, his fingers mangled, some of them gone. But by the end of that baseball season, this 9-year-old boy had 60 autographed baseballs from the Cardinals team that would go on to win the World Series. One moment, one man. What more can I do? What more can you do? Again, through this process of adversity, at first I played the victim card. At first I ran until I couldn't run any further. And eventually I turned around and was faced with the biggest problem, the biggest adversity that I had ever known in my entire life. And it cost me almost my life. But it caused me to ask and pose the very same decision that cost my dad his life. Except I turned it on its head and asked, what more can I do? How can I be a cure in a world that's filled with cancer? During that battle, I was home one week trying to recover for the next week of treatments, and I was watching basketball that week. On the TV, I saw Jimmy V Week, which is when they raise money on ESPN for cancer research. Jimmy V was a legendary basketball coach, and he lost his life after a long battle with cancer. But each and every year at the ESPY Awards, there's a talk where they present someone with the Arthur Ashe Courage Award as part of this week for cancer research. This particular man delivered a speech in his own battle with cancer. His name was Stuart Scott. And growing up, he was one of my favorite announcers on ESPN. He brought so much life to the desk, to the presentation. He made you want to tune in each and every night to see the highlights of my favorite sports fans. In this particular speech, he summed up what it meant to be a cure better than I ever could. He said, when you die, you don't lose to cancer. You beat cancer by how you live, why you live, and the manner in which you live each and every day. It was at that moment where I decided I wanted to be a cure. Because at the end of the day, being a cure recognizes that it's not even about me. When I started sharing this story, the first time I ever shared my story was at a Relay for Life event, and I still had cancer. And I said, well, wait a minute here. I can't give a survivor talk when I'm not a survivor. But what they told me was, you're a survivor the day you're diagnosed. And I believe we're survivors the day we're born. But it's our choice in the smallest moments to not just be survivors, but to be a cure in a world that's filled with cancer. And we do that each and every day by how we live, why we live, and the manner in which we live each and every day. So I pose to you the same question. Will you choose to be a cure? Will you choose to be a cure by how you live, why you live, and the manner in which you live each and every day? Because suddenly, when we choose to be a cure, the world becomes, rather than a place of disease and negativity, it becomes a world of abundance where the possibilities are endless and the number of people that you can impact goes on forever. And so again, I go back to that walk with my mom. From the age of 2, when I had to be held up as she walked me to the grave. And each and every year we would walk out, loving husband and father. And all of a sudden, it became so clear to me. How do I want to be remembered? I want to be remembered as a cure. And I hope you do too. So each and every day, in the smallest of moments, choose to be a cure. And you can be remembered as a cure too. Thank you so much, and God bless.